thank you, Paul, for your invitation to this live roundtable discussion to talk about the impact of the August 2020 government planning white paper. I will start by saying that there is indeed a gap between the numbers of planning applications approved by planning departments and the number of new homes being delivered. But I can't stress strongly enough that I don't expect the planning changes suggested by the government to lead to increased housing delivery. The white paper fails to acknowledge the historic link of public spending with high total levels of per annum housing delivery. It's characteristic that in the 1960s and 70s, there was a high number of houses being built yearly, but that only happened because of private and public house building combined. Policies existed at the time, motivating increased publicly led housing delivery. Now, this changed radically during Thatcher's government in '79, which initially imposed huge reductions in government funds allocated towards housing provision, and later with the Housing Act 1988, which moved funding to housing associations and away from councils directly. Right to buy also led to a year-by-year reduction of council housing stocks, with the government offering insufficient financial assistance to allow for one-to-one replacement of social homes, even though there have been some welcome changes to right to buy recently, as Linda mentioned. It's simplistic to think that due to making the permissions easier for developers to receive, that will translate into more houses being built annually. Even with the government's plans for strategic planning advisory bodies and attempts to link the needs of the business community with land allocation in local plans, this still does not guarantee increased housing delivery. I want to now cover two main areas: the aspects of the white paper with regards to zoning, and the idea of introducing pattern recognition for the approval of planning applications. Right, so in terms of zoning, I mean, it's very much an American logic of restricting development types in certain areas. The development has suggested three zones broadly: protected zones, renewal zones, and growth zones. And whilst protected and renewal zones would retain some of the existing protections alongside permitted development rules, in growth zones, planning applications would receive automatic approval. So yeah, growth zones would allow planning approval for all sorts of applications, no matter how speculative. I think the biggest problem with growth zones is the one of local democracy. Now, if one was unlucky enough to live in a growth zone and there was a massive development planned to next to one's house, he or she would have no right to offer representations against the development, nor do anything to stop it from being built. So the community would be effectively excluded from the decision-making process, but so would the councils, as they wouldn't be afforded the right to comment on the technical aspects of development. And then there is the aspect of the new system as being one based on code and pattern recognition, and on streamlining planning processes through making patterns machine readable. I mean, it goes as far as proposing a fast track for beauty. This last bit represents perhaps a complete lack of understanding of aesthetics, which is, of course, as previous speakers rightly noted, an inherently subjective and moral concept. Now, patterns and machines can help, but in the absence of individual engagement in a case-by-case manner, there is the very real danger of ending up with monotonous designs that may tick the boxes, but are set up by the system, but would lack the exposure to individual critique and judgment. And that's quite interesting. I went back to my university literature, and I found one quote by Walter Benjamin by the early 20s, in which he was talking about the effect of mechanical reproduction in the arts back in his time, the invention of the photograph and so on. And I'll quote a small bit from what he said. He said, "As all things lose the power to express their essence and substitute ambiguity for authenticity, so too does the city." Well, I think a fast track for beauty infused in law risks exactly that, the devaluing of the built environment in ambiguous forms that would represent neither architects nor local communities. Codes and patterns also have other limitations. No matter how good a code is, some processes need to be done by experts on its individual fields. the risk assessments for flooding, the archaeological surveys, and all other papers of that sort need to be ideally completed before an approval is granted by specialists. Now, if only codes are used and automatic permissions are provided, then there is the very real risk of building structures that are at risk of flooding, that don't necessarily have the sustainability feature we want, that don't provide appropriate standards for human habitation, that fail to protect underground archaeology, and so on and so on. So anyway, I'm going to stop there and let the next speaker come in. So thank you all for your attention, and looking forward to the discussion and questions.